Canada is heading toward an August 19th tariff showdown. But this time, Ottawa is not entering the fight empty-handed. Exports have hit record levels, Canada added 75,000 jobs in July, and a new Ecuador trade deal could widen access across South America's Pacific coast. Yet the United States still dominates Canadian autos, parts, and cross-border manufacturing. Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. The question now is whether these new trade routes can give Canada real leverage when Washington turns up the pressure. Here are 5 developments showing how Canada's Pacific strategy could reshape the coming showdown. Number 5. Canada defies tariff pressure, exports and jobs surge. Canada's latest data complicates the idea that U.S. tariff pressure is simply pushing its economy backward. June merchandise exports reached a record 77.5 billion Canadian dollars, while Canada posted roughly a 3.9 billion Canadian dollar global trade surplus. Automotive exports provided extra horsepower. Motor vehicles and parts rose 2.4% in June and 19.3% during the second quarter, with passenger cars and light trucks reaching their strongest level since March 2025. Currency effects helped inflate headline values, but export volume still increased 1.1%. Then July delivered another surprise. Canada added about 75,000 jobs as unemployment slipped to 6.4%. Diversification did not create all those gains, but it strengthens Ottawa's negotiating position heading into the next showdown. And those stronger numbers matter even more when Ottawa's next trade route comes into focus. Number 4. Canada expands Pacific reach. Ecuador opens new door. Ottawa added another lane to its trade diversification map on July 24th, when Canada and Ecuador signed a free trade agreement. It is not active yet. Both countries must complete ratification before tariff benefits begin. Once implemented, Canada says it will have agreements with every country on South America's Pacific coast: Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. Two-way merchandise trade with Ecuador already reached about 2 billion Canadian dollars in 2025, covering everything from cocoa and shrimp to Canadian cereals, fertilizers, and fuels. This is not a replacement for the US market. Think of it more like adding alternate routes around a congested highway. Smaller individually, but strategically valuable when the main corridor gets expensive. But signing the route is only half the story. The real leverage begins when tariffs start disappearing. Number 3. Tariffs start falling. Canadian autos gain new access. The Ecuador agreement carries a particularly interesting automotive angle. Once in force, Ecuador has committed to eliminate duties on 97.2% of tariff lines when fully implemented, while more than 89% of industrial tariff lines covering Canadian goods are scheduled to become duty-free immediately. Automobiles are specifically included alongside aerospace products, metals, chemicals, plastics, fertilizers, and technology. That does not mean Canadian-built vehicles suddenly flood Ecuador. Freight, local demand, dealer networks, regulations, and rules of origin still matter. But tariffs can determine whether an export program clears the profitability line. For Canadian automakers and suppliers, lower trade friction creates another potential outlet and another bargaining chip when U.S. access becomes costlier. Before we get to the final 2 developments, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us reach more auto enthusiasts who want to understand how trade policy, tariffs, and global supply chains are reshaping the vehicles we drive. Now let's shift gears, because lower tariffs only matter if Canada has the ports, railways, and trade routes to move those vehicles and parts efficiently. Number 2. Canada builds Pacific gateways. New trade routes strengthen. Trade agreements mean little if goods cannot move efficiently. That is why Canada's 5 billion Canadian dollar Trade Diversification Corridors Fund matters. Ottawa is expanding ports, railways, highways, airports, and bridges to strengthen access beyond the United States. Mark Carney has highlighted the Pacific Gateway, noting that Vancouver handles roughly 1 billion Canadian dollars in daily trade with 170 countries. For automakers, this is about redundancy, not replacing North America's deeply integrated supply chain. Engines, transmissions, electronics, and finished vehicles may still cross U.S. borders repeatedly. But stronger Pacific infrastructure creates backup lanes when tariffs raise costs. Trade deals reduce legal friction. Infrastructure reduces physical friction, and Canada is investing in both for future shocks. And now, all those alternative routes face the real test. Whether they can translate into negotiating leverage when Washington turns up the tariff pressure. Number 1. August 19th Showdown. Autos become Canada's bargaining chip. Canada's diversification strategy now meets its biggest test, the August 19th tariff deadline. On August 6th, Dominic LeBlanc and Chief Negotiator Janice Charette met U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer as Ottawa pursued relief from sectoral tariffs. Reuters then reported discussions involving possible Canadian concessions on U.S.-made autos, dairy quotas, and American alcohol, potentially in exchange for eased U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs. Nothing is finalized, but autos are clearly part of the bargaining equation. That matters for an industry built on cross-border parts flows and razor-thin cost calculations. Canada has not escaped U.S. leverage, but more export routes may give Ottawa additional negotiating traction before the deadline at the table. Verdict: Canada gains options as Washington turns up pressure. Canada is not replacing the United States, and in autos, energy, and manufacturing, that would be unrealistic. Instead, Ottawa is trying to make dependence less absolute by building more routes, more markets, and more negotiating options. Ecuador adds another potential Pacific market connection after ratification, while the $5 billion Canadian Corridor Fund aims to strengthen the ports, railways, highways, and trade infrastructure needed to make diversification practical. Record June merchandise exports, stronger automotive shipments, and July's 75,000 job gain give Canada a firmer economic backdrop as negotiations intensify. But the real test arrives with the August 19th tariff threat. If these alternatives begin influencing Washington's calculations, Canada will have achieved something more valuable than replacing one customer: greater room to maneuver. That does not eliminate U.S. leverage. It simply means Ottawa is trying to ensure that when one trade lane tightens, Canadian exporters, manufacturers, and automakers still have somewhere else to confidently steer next. So, what do you think? Can Canada's Pacific trade strategy meaningfully reduce its dependence on the United States? Should Ottawa use automotive tariffs as a bargaining chip if it helps secure relief for steel and aluminum? And could expanded ports and export corridors eventually reshape where Canadian-built vehicles and parts are sold? Share your thoughts and any experiences you have with Canada-US automotive trade, manufacturing, or tariffs in the comments section. And if you want to stay ahead of the next major vehicle updates, industry shifts, and upcoming videos, subscribe to Piston Pundit and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's plenty more to explore. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.